Recording officially. So hey everybody, welcome back to the Sustainable Design Masterclass. We are dedicated to bringing you some of the top, most game-changing regenerative system designers in the world, and I'm so excited to bring Darren Doherty here with Neil Spackman. First of all, we got some feedback going on, so... Okay, first of all, yeah, guys, turn off your distractions because Darren has some of the best information out there about regenerative system designing. His depth of information is incredible. So yeah, throw your phone into the garbage can, like lock it away, turn off that Facebook, because you'll definitely want to be excited for. You're going to be excited for what Darren's going to present. It's going to be fantastic.
Yes, I'll just turn mine off too.
How's my sound now?
You still it's a little bit robot-y, but I'm sure people will be fine through the intro.
All right, cool. I'll turn off my video and then just do the audio. Now how's it sound?
There we go. Now it sounds all right.
Okay, so that's an issue on my end.
Yeah.
All right, so welcome everybody. I've been doing kind of this. I've been in this industry, I guess, the permaculture, land use design. I've been doing this professionally for about 6 years, and sometime in the early 2011, I came across a video of Darren digging on the beach and talking about Keyline. I don't know, you know that YouTube video you did, Darren, where you created a mountain range on the beach? And,
I do. I remember it very well. It was a lovely afternoon. You and our friends.
So I had done some reading into holistic management. It was Dennis McDonough's book, Cradle to Cradle, that initially got me turned on to this stuff. And so Darren came on my radar sometime in early 2011. And then when I saw the platform he put together for Regrarians, where he was combining, he did a lot of work with Bill Mollison in permaculture, but then he expanded beyond that, and he had integrated permaculture with holistic management, with cradle-to-cradle design, with all these other philosophies that I had read about, and in my own path, I was trying to combine these things, in a synchronous way. And so when I had seen that Darren had put together a platform that already had combined all this stuff, and that he had been doing this for over a decade. You're coming up on 2 decades now, or maybe you're past it.
No, past that, yeah.
Yeah, and so I said to myself, I've got to go take a course with Darren or go work with him or something. And I finally got the chance to do that early 2016. And it was a fantastic experience for me. It helped me put a lot of things together that I had been mulling over in my head. And so I'm really pleased that we're able to bring him on and have him give you a bit of an introduction to the Regrarians Platform. And I'll just say that doing the course that he taught on this, it was a 10-day course. It tied so many things together for me, and I take so many things from that course and use them in my daily work. When I'm out in Saudi Arabia, and I don't know that I can give a better review than that the stuff he teaches is the stuff that I've adopted and that I use. So, Darren, we're really happy to have you here. Welcome to everybody else, and let's turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, mate. That's really kind of you to say all of those lovely things. Yeah, we started in 1993 on the day of our first daughter's birth. I gave up my job as an organic grocer, prior to which I was a chef. And prior to that, I was working full-time on my grandparents' farm, which I grew up on. I was very fortunate in one way that my father was killed in the Vietnam War, which some people would already know about, when I was 3 months old. And fortunate, obviously, is not the right word, but it did give me the opportunity to be set on this path, because my agrarian grandfather became my father and taught me everything he knew, including the Keyline system that he developed on the family farm over the 30 or 40 years prior sorry, not 30, probably 20 or so years prior to me coming along, and which I then was able to operate. He didn't call it a Keyline system. He didn't talk about it, but later on, that's what I knew it was, because he'd identified it as when I found out about Keyline myself. So my first foray into all of this sort of space came from food and organics and Keyline, and the first book I really wrote on alternative agriculture, because you have to remember, Keyline, by the time I came across it, was already a 40-year-old business in Australia, and it was well adopted. Was Masanobu Fukuoka's book, One Straw Revolution. A friend of mine lent that to me, and went, wow, this is something else. And I think I read the third of the three books, The Natural Way of Farming, and it had a photo of an Australian in there called Bill Mollison. I went, oh, who's this dude? So I better follow him up, and I did my first PDC in November of 1993. I got a Visa card, so I got the money, and I think it cost $1,000, and it was a great experience on a farm on the south coast of New South Wales with a couple of gents. A lot of fun. Then I did another PDC with Bill himself in 95, and then I did an earthworks course with Bill in 96. Although we didn't do a lot of earthworks, we spent most of the time sitting inside or walking around the farm up at his old New South Wales farm, Tagari, and then staying up till 5 a.m. every day and getting up at 9, staying up listening to Bill tell his stories. He was single at the time, and we drank a lot of coffee and smoked a lot of cigarettes. And I'm very, very fortunate to have had those 6 days with him. And since, and I started teaching with him when he asked me to teach with him, because he said it was about time I started teaching in 2001. So I did 2 PDCs with him in that year, and he and Janet Millington, and then I taught 42 or 43 PDCs after that, about half of those by myself. And I've stopped doing the permaculture brand stuff from about 2011, once I developed the Regrarians Platform. For me, that was a moment, and I think a lot of people will get to this if they don't get to it early, is that self-determination that some people get to. Some people get to it earlier in their lives. Some, like me, got to it a bit later. I was sort of always in this camp that was, am I a keyliner? Am I a permaculturalist? Am I a holistic manager? And so really in the development of the platform that we've developed, it wasn't until about 2009, 2010, when I developed the carbon farming series in the US. I was on a flight in the US, and I came up with this. I just wrote all of these icons of all of these different methodologies and how they all synchronized with each other. And that was the genesis of it. And then when I taught all of Australia's holistic management certified educators, they'd written to me, and some of these people have been doing holistic management since the late 80s as trainers. They were much more senior than I am, and they invited me to come and teach them land planning, because they'd identified that collectively, as a collective, as being a weak link. And so they invited me to come and do that, and I was talking to the guy about that in preparation, and I said to him, so, because he taught Keyline at a community college equivalent, and I said to him, so how do you teach Keyline? And he said, oh, I use the Keyline Scale of Permanence. And I went, oh, do you? It was sort of like one of those moments where someone hit you over the head with a brick, and you realised at that point that something that had been there all the time and that you'd been using as a tool was actually the platform. And so from that, I led that course, and then straight away after that, I studied the Keyline Scale of Permanence just that bit more closely, and then I thought, well, how can I use this? Because it was a very powerful teaching tool to teach from 1 to 8 of it, and then from there I put on economy and energy, and I changed the emphasis and some of the wording, and away we went. And so that was a very, very powerful moment for me personally. It led me to the development of the Regrarians brand, which didn't take very long. Again, it was another plane flight, just brainstorming with my notebook and making the neologism that is Regrarians, and away we've gone from there. So that's enough of that. And let's go on. Now, I've got Landstream up here on the branding here. Landstream's a company that I've worked with. Abe Collins I've worked with him since 2006. He started the world's first carbon farming group, the Carbon Farmers of America. And he may well have even been the person who came up with the term carbon farming. But we've been working together since 2006, and so I just wanted to acknowledge that in there. And I have a relationship with his company, so which is Landstream, which you'll all hear about much more of in the future. I've got water, carbon, and soil for every farm. That's somewhat of a homage to PA Yeomans' 1966 work, which was came in subsequent editions, called Water for Every Farm. And because for me, it's I came up with this term. You have to be blue before you're green and black. And and Neil, you know this better than anyone, I think. With your work in an environment which is hyper arid at best, and gets an incredibly low amount of rainfall. I mean, it's raining here today in what is a dry part of Australia, and we'll probably get today what Neil gets in 2 years. So that gives you some appreciation of how important blue is water. You've got to get that absolutely right, and Keyline as a framework does that better than anything else, in my opinion. Then you have to have carbon, and carbon is a corollary of getting that. So you've got to have, and carbon comes from vegetation. So you've got to have water, which is blue, before you're green, which is carbon, which is vegetation, and then from that you get soil, which is black. But you can also take that and say, well, you've got to have blue, which is a good attitude, and you've got to develop your water systems, develop the green in the system, which is not just vegetation but also economy. And further to that, you've got to have black, which means you've actually got a profitable economy, whether it's a profitable vegetative or a profitable ecology, because some ecologies are not profitable. And a profitable financial currency for yourself in order to be able to operate. Because if we're going to talk about regenerative agriculture, well, then you can't do that in a vacuum of not working with money. I do some work for people where I do designs for pork and design work or consulting for chicken, but that doesn't put fuel in the Hilux. So we've got to play this, which for some people, particularly those who've come from, say, the harder side, as it were, of the permaculture game. A lot of people are looking at really alternative economic strategies, and I get that. But for us, we're trying to deal with the here and now. So let's deal with that. So just before I go along, another thing with our companies, Regrarians is our non-profit. Darren Doherty is our family company, and that's our for-profit. So we've got that sort of structure, which a lot of people would know about. We have 3 main products. We have the Regrarians Handbook, which is a work in progress, and some of you will have already got that. It's $5 a chapter, so we're selling it as ebook chapters, and you can get that online at regrarians.org. We do the Rex, and this is the one that Neil did. It's a 10-day adventure. We've got 3 of those running in France this year with our partners there in Permaterra. And then we're moving that model over to being both a completely online and a part online, part on-site experience. So that'll be happening. So part of that will be this year, and then from 2018. So we're working on the design of that now with some partners. And then we've got the Polyfaces film, which my wife Lisa and our eldest daughter Isabella, who I left work for to start this business, is developed over 4 years. It's obviously about the Polyface farm. And some of you will have seen that. I'd highly encourage you to watch it. You can buy a DVD or a screening. You can go to polyfaces.com to that. And it's won I think 7 awards as best film, and it's been official selection in about 15 other film festivals. So it's got quite a lot of accolades. So have a look at that. All right, plugs out of the way. Climate is the first thing. So this concerns the climates of an enterprise, and as you can see from the triptych, what we've looked at is that, and I'm working with Andrew Jeeves here. He did the Permaculture Designer's Manual and most of Permaculture 2 and Introduction to Permaculture. So some of you will recognise his work from there. He's been in a bit of a hiatus, teaching soil courses and holistic management and running beef farms and building boats and all the rest of it. And so we've come together over the last 5 years to work on this project, and which has been great because I've always admired him as an illustrator, and I admire him even more as a person. He's become a really good friend. So with the triptych here, it's describing the patterns. We've got the patterns of a cumulus cloud, which is all a lobular pattern, and then we've got all of these spirals of connections of currents in our ocean currents, and then we've got the lobes in our brain. And I came up with a term one day. I don't know. I was probably riffing while I was on stage doing a talk. That the climate of the mind is the hardest thing to change, and when we're dealing with people in agriculture, it seems even more so. And that's partly as a result of the diffusion of innovation, which Everett Rogers first set forth in 1963 in his book of the same name, The Diffusion of Innovations. That, some people are innovators, and I classify myself and have been classified officially as one of those. And then you've got early adopters, and early adopters and innovators are kind of similar people, or the early adopters often follow the innovators. And then you've got the early majority who make up they're one of the 2 larger proportions of our population. And then you've got the late majority. So the innovators come up with the ideas. The early majority are the first people to go and stand at the front of the Apple store getting the iPhone. And then you've got the people who go, okay, well, how does the iPhone work? Is it worth getting? They get it. And then you've got finally people like my father or someone like that, my stepfather, finally gets an iPhone 7 years after they were let out. And then you've got the recalcitrants, people who will always have what they call a dumb phone, even if they have a dumb phone at all. So, climate of the mind is a really big thing. That's one of the big parts of why we brought holistic management into our platform, because I don't know a methodology in this space that deals with that as well. So with that, I'm just going to go through a range of policies that we've developed in this relatively abridged presentation with no photos at this stage. So identify what gets you out of bed in the morning. That's the first thing that we ask the client, because we have to be doing what we love, and we have to be doing what makes us happy. And if we're not doing that, then really, then we've got to really change what we're doing. I know that some people are in a situation where they can't do that, financially particularly, sometimes relationship-wise, but particularly financially, and that sucks, but it doesn't mean that it's over. If you've got enough age ahead of you, time ahead of you, then definitely do what you can to make you happy. Do what you can so that as our friend Jovan Banakovic says, who's designing your life? Is it you or is it somebody else? Now, if you wake up tomorrow morning and go, well, I'm going to design my life, and you get to work on it, it's probably likely that will happen. Using holistic management frameworks for decision making are a really good way of doing that, and starting off with that holistic context where you're identifying all right, what's the quality of life I want? What are the forms of production that are going to pay for that and provide for that quality of life? And then what's the future resource base that I'm building over time and that I'll leave as an important part of that whole regenerative thing? Regeneration to me means, it's in the Bible where it says, life begets life. You've got to go from, and that means in this space that we go from, when we look at the future resource base, that this generation will provide for the next generation. And unlike the atrophy that we've been given on this planet, we actually move from atrophy to sustainability. If we can get to sustainability, perfect. But if we can go even further to regeneration, so that what we leave our next generations is a regenerating planet, not an atrophying planet, then we'll know we're on the right path. But sustainability is the first goal. We need to look at financial, land and grazing planning, and cropping planning, which holistic management people at the Savory Institute have included more recently, as they've been happy to include things like Colin Seise's pasture cropping in particular, which has been proven to be a regenerative annual cropping system, cereal cropping system and vegetable cropping system as it is now. Matching enterprises to human meteorological climate. So, trying to grow bananas where you get frost 60 days of the year is not going to work. And trying to match enterprises to what people actually like to do. They're things that we spend a bit of work on doing when we're helping people reboot, as we do with matching personalities to job descriptions. These are really important parts of the climate of a job, as we call it. Understanding the regulatory climate. That's a real bummer for a lot of people. I go to a lot of second and third world countries or developing countries, and you can see you've got no capital, tons of labour, low labour prices, and a great regulatory climate, but markets are all, and value chains are not well developed, and all of the rest of it. And then you go to Western countries, EU, Australia, and the US, and places where you have an extraordinary amount of regulation, and regulation in that case is really strong part of the climate layer, as we call it. So identifying it, and as our friend Paul Carregino said up at the Rex in Oregon last year, and he said, we've got to work with the ecology of government, and so understanding the climate of government and our regulators is really important, and then work within its ecology. They're still made up of people, so we do what we can there. And then be strategic, incremental, pragmatic, and fiscally disciplined. These are really important parts of the pathway to getting success, and you've got to think that way from the get-go. So that's where we're at. Now, I'm going to talk about today a whole number of people, especially a bit later on when we look at some examples. But these are some of the people, some of the brave pioneers that we've worked with over the more recent years. Abe Collins up here in the top right corner, and Alan Yeomans in the bottom right-hand corner. They're people we've worked with for a long time. Alan for all of my career, and he's PA Yeomans' son, and Abe since 2006. He's playing with sensors. So the rest of the people in this montage are people that we've worked with since we developed the Regrarians Platform. So we're dealing with people. We're dealing with people, and we're dealing with landscapes, and so working this out is really important from the get-go. So, Neil, you'd remember that at the Rex in California, the first we did on the series last year, we had a pretty deep climate layer on that day, and it really sets the tone that once you get that going, you can't develop these systems in the absence of acknowledging people are involved. It's such a limiting factor. The landscape design I find completely easy, and I think many of you who are listening would agree. It's relatively easy once you get some orientation on what to do the landscape design. the people and the people and their financial management is by far the hardest part of this hobby. Pardon me?
Yeah, I was just, it's a frequent maxim of mine that people systems are the hardest systems.
Yeah.
I'm in a hard system in terms of climate and water and all that, but people systems are always going to be the hardest, absolutely.
Yeah, well, and if if you have both, then things are going to be tough. Maybe you need to look at another area or country. All right, now we'll look at geography. So geography is something that has another array of opportunities and difficulties, as everything does. And so in our system, I would call the climate layer the rules of the game, because it's based, what you define there, create your rules, your boundaries. And then the geography is the palette that you have. We're typically working within properties. For the last 600 or 700 years, we've been working with properties as people anyway. So it's the board game. So people get that 5 or 10 or 500 or 500,000 acre site to work on, and it's the place that we're going to get to work on. So how proximate is it? What are all of the contours of the landscape? And what are all of the attributes, which are all defined somewhat in the 3 images that you have on your screen there. So the geography of a landscape places it in its catchment. In permaculture parlance, Bill Mollison, I think, did as much as anyone to popularise the term bioregion. So where do you fit within your bioregion? People like Mark Shepard talk about where do you fit within, what biome are you in? All of that is where we're looking at what's that connection between our climate and our geography. And I took land shape, which was Yeomans' part layer in the scale of permanence, to geography, because geography is so much more encompassing, because it includes not only to land shape or topography, but it also talks about demography, psychography, proximity, geology, and so many other features of land. So when we look at the geography layer and some of our policies, we're looking at planning and placement based on geology, because surface geology influences a lot of what your land is capable of, as does topography and as does aspect. So when we're looking at doing a lot of land capability work, where we're classifying a landscape according to its best uses, then surface geology or surface soil type, topography, and aspect. So topography, I mean, how much slope does it have? And aspect will influence incredibly what capability a landscape will have to use for a range of land uses. How does your geography affect your marketing? I mean, I work with clients who are 7-10 hours from a city of 5,000 people. Now, you're not going to do the farmers market thing if you're that sort of property owner. But then I've got other clients who are 1 hour from 5 million people. So your geography and your proximity to your market is going to really influence you. And so we do a bit of work, and that's listed in the Regrarians handbook, about how we use Google Earth and what questions to ask. And how we use the census of various countries, how we use whatever statistical information that we can get. And you're in an era an unparalleled era of being able to get that through the gift that is the internet, and pull all of that together. Understand the demography. Who are the people? I came up with a term last year while I was riffing. How do you while I was, I think it was at the second Rex in Kansas, where I was looking at this place, St. Francis, Kansas, which is right near the Colorado border in western Kansas, and it's about, I don't know, 1,300 people, classic old Midwestern town, declining but on its way back as well because of a few key people. And I was looking at, it had a Dollar General, which someone said, oh yeah, we call that Squalor General. And then while we're talking about demography, I said, yeah, well, it's what we have here is we have what we can do is called piggyback, what I call piggyback marketing. When we have chains everywhere, chains do the marketing for us. So we know that if there's a Whole Foods, then there must be the marketers at Whole Foods have done sufficient marketing to determine that there is enough of their demographic to support a Whole Foods being established. Just as the people who put in that Dollar General know that there's sufficient people of that demographic to support them, and so on you go. So you can look at, you can sort of break down what other people are doing and piggyback a lot on what they do. And, does a town have a place that serves espresso coffee, or is it still all excuse me, or is it all still in the jug? That tells you a lot. Does the place have a theatre? Does it have a cinema? Does it have a library that's open regularly? Does it have art galleries? Does it have farmers markets, and how frequent are they? And how well patronised are they? There's all of these things that one can look at to get some sort of a sense about the community that you're working with and that you're looking to play with. Water, an enterprise's water availability is relatively fixed. One of the first things that we look at on the water layer are what are all of the sources of water. And once we look at what the sources are, so they are how much rain, infiltrated rainfall you get, and this is all from Keyline. So the four sources or four categories of water in Keyline are infiltrated rainfall, which is by far the cheapest water. And because all you have to do there is do the work on infiltrating rain, and that may be as simple as making sure that the soil surface is covered. Secondly, is captured surface water, and then thirdly is groundwater in its various states and depths. And fourth is river or channel water, so water that's being supplied to you by a channel, which you then have to typically use pumps to put into your system. So we always focus initially with any client, once we get down onto land management, to having 100% ground cover 100% of the time. That's our priority. It doesn't matter where we are. And what we find, and I came to this sort of realization quite a few years ago, was that I, like a lot of people in this space, and I've developed this term more recently, did big D development and small M management. That term comes from some political discussions here in Australia, where people were saying, well, I'm a big L liberal or a small L liberal, and so on. A big S socialist or a small S socialist. So, people who, I was a big D developer, and a lot of people in this space, I look at someone like Sepp Holzer, he is a really big D developer. Jeff Lawton, very big D. Mark Shepherd, big D. All those people who do a lot of earthworks are big D developers. And how are they on management? And I was in that space, and so what I wasn't seeing, I was expressing my hubris as a human, which is natural, and I wasn't listening to that great saying of Alan Savory, which is, when planning for the environment, assume that you're wrong. And so taking that big step back says, all right, well, how do you actually keep going without doing that much? And 100% ground cover 100% of the time is the best thing to look at. So that's our sort of initial approach, is to try and use management to try and get energy flow by having plants grow across any plant. I don't care what plant it is, whatever's growing, or whatever you can get growing quickly, get them growing so that you can get 100% ground cover. Because as soon as you do that, then you start to infiltrate rainfall. And infiltrating rainfall using these methods is far, far cheaper than any other method that we've got. Now, again, I've got Neil on the call here. Well, he's my host, co-host, and he's dealing with pure rock. Well, you can cover pure rock with mulch, but it will probably blow away. Or you can do so. Sometimes you've got to be a bit more radical, and so the curve goes back over to development a bit more. But for a lot of people living and working in landscapes which are agricultural, that means they are covered with some soil. One doesn't need to necessarily go and create incisions everywhere, and deep and permanent incisions, in order to get things going. Sometimes all you need to do is just get root systems developing and build soil depth, and therefore change the internal drainage characteristics of those soils before you go and start cutting everything up. And that took me a while to realise, and about 10 years or so. So using gravity and pipe wherever possible is, we've got this gift of oil, fossil oil, and it's been made in a plastic pipe. Plastic pipe is amazing stuff. I mean, to be able to go and bury pipe and deliver this precious fluid under gravity and under great control with all these amazing fittings is revelationary to the land manager. So, and then you've got this thing called gravity. Wow. So when you start to do that, that's when you start to use that, it's really positive. Then we've got understanding volume. So trying to make sure that you understand volume, and with that, how much your livestock might need, or how much your plant system might need, and going through all of the math that you have to do in designing the application or the installation of this network of reticulation. Because it's not cheap. None of this is cheap when you get to the water layer. It's an expensive layer to be managing. So reuse water as many times as is feasible. So thinking of, coming to the design plate with that in mind. And then, as I think it was Brock Dolman who came up with the term, which then Brad Lancaster popularised, spread it, slow it, and sink it. So get the water so it spreads in its flow, slow it down, and sink it. So if I go out to some of the properties that we've been involved with right now, I'll go to them, I'll drive past their neighbours. We've had about an inch overnight, beautiful steady rain, and I know that a lot of those properties there'll be runoff everywhere, creeks will be bursting, well, just from an inch, because their ground is not accepting water. And then I'll go to the properties that we're working with, and even though they've had fence to fence, been exactly the same climate conditions, it's been dry, and ground gets a bit harder as it gets dry, most of the water that we've just had will have infiltrated, because the soil is 100% ground covered 100% of the time, and it's accepting of it, and it's got a rhizosphere, a root layer, which is ever deepening that soil profile. So access. So Yeomans had farm roads. I've got access. Access is obviously a lot more of an inclusive term than just roads. So roads, tracks, lanes, internet access, all of these different things. Do you have electricity, etc.? All of these things within the access layer are pretty critical. A lot of people put roads. I go to so many properties where the roads are all in the wrong places. Sometimes it's not the case, but a lot of cases it is, and we have to do new stuff, or we have to do a lot of work to make those roads work. I went to a property recently I'm just starting consulting with, and started developing their property about 5 years ago, and they put this. It's one of those classic cases where they put a couple of ponds in, a couple of dams, and they've got a road, and the two features don't come together. And the dam gets empty every year because it's got no catchment. One of our things that we commonly do is build roads so that roads, and this is the scale of permanence. You think of water before you think of roads. You think of geography before you think of water and etc. You think of your climate, how much money have I got, what do I actually need to build, what's feasible for me. I need to pull all of that together before I get to these expensive layers. I mean, it costs anywhere between $2 and $10 a metre to build a road. It costs between $3 and $10 a cubic yard to move earth. So it's not cheap. It costs $2 to $4 a lineal metre or a lineal yard for 2-inch pipe. None of this stuff is cheap, and the volumes when you get out of up over acreage start to really build up on you. So having some understanding and having a platform to guide you is really, really helpful somehow. And trying to use some of those principles of different ecological design platforms, such as permaculture. One of the best known and best applied permaculture principles is that each element performs multiple functions, and then the principle that is allied to that is that each element is supported by many other elements. So if I've got a pond on this client's property, the pond is not supported by anything. It's just a pond in a valley that fills, if they're lucky, every year and supplies their water. I can guarantee that it would fill by putting a road connected to it. Now, a road is anywhere from a 60 to 90% efficient catchment surface. That is, 60 to 90% of the rain that hits that road will run off, and it becomes a gutter, a hard surface gutter that will put water into that dam reliably every year. In most years, more reliable than just relying on a landscape. One of our objectives with the landscape, all of this white space in between here, is to have it infiltrate, remember. So, if a corollary of your good land management is increased infiltration, not increased runoff. So if you're relying on ponds in your landscape as a source of water, well, then you need to put some other strategies in place. Otherwise, your infiltrated landscape will be fantastic, but your animals and your crops, if you need irrigation and stock water, will need to come from somewhere. So place access according to topography and to optimize water control and harvesting potential. Reconcile the value of retaining or replacing access. It costs about the same to wipe out an access as it does to build one. No, I'm generalising there. Sometimes it's more, but it's around about the same price. And sometimes it's so bad, it's just you're better off just smudging it and revegetating it. And we've done a bit of that work over the years. So yeah. Layer number 5, forestry. Now, Yeomans had farm trees. I've got forestry. Again, a term that encompasses a lot more than just farm trees. So I look at perennial woody plant systems as being vital, productive, and overarching elements in most landscapes. Their assemblies can be complex, and people overcomplicate things at times with that, and there's a place for that sometimes, but their placement is critical to support and provide for other systems in shelter and forage and all of the other, in timber, lumber, etc. All of the uses that we have for trees, biodiversity, etc. So land protection and climate moderation. So there's all of those features that trees have for us, and I look at that. It sort of came to me that every agricultural ecosystem should be a forested ecosystem. So an agroforestry. It's just the density of trees that will change. So if I'm working on a on a large cereal growing property of 5 to 10,000 acres or hectares, how does forestry fit in that when that farmer doesn't want to have? He just wants to grow cereal, annual cereals. Well, cereals benefit from some shade as well, and so and their economy as humans will benefit from that, both in the short, medium, and long term. So their climate on their site will be moderated. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. Also, the position of those trees in wide-spaced alleys, for example, can be either north-south if the landscape's pretty flat, or it can be put into some sort of equidistant keyline formation, which would allow us to have a permanently defined pathway for all machinery that operates in that, such that water is always under control, or under as much control as possible, so that we increase the effectiveness of any rainfall, which is always an important thing in cereal growing. So plant and retain the right trees and shrubs in the right place and in the right layer and configuration. Don't put a $10 tree into a 20-cent hole. Again, trees are not cheap things. You can do things to cheapen the experience, but then if you go and put it into a bit of bad ground preparation, well, you're not going to get a really good result. I look admiringly at, again, what Mark Shepherd's done and what he's brought forward with his stun technique, sheer total utter neglect, and the idea of planting really cheap trees into landscapes which have been moderately, I'd say, looking at the ground prep recommendations that people have done in that space, they're okay. They're probably, I mean, I'd give them about a C or a D in a lot of cases compared with the ground prep that we do, which I'd call elite, and an A plus. That if you get what you give in this space. So if you put a tree, you can put the best tree in the world into crappy ground preparation, and it'll just never perform. And so, but you can also put really cheap trees into that, and they'll perform. And yes, they'll be involved in some sort of ongoing ecology that mimics what would happen in nature, sans fire, because that's one feature of indigenous land management. With their working with regrowth of woody vegetation in humid environments, that they used fire as a key tool, and most people in this space are not using fire as a key tool to manage woody vegetation. So, we've got to play. Sometimes we've got to play this a bit smarter. That with our limited resources, having systems which are laid out, spending that bit of extra effort and energy and money on ground preparation will result in a layout that doesn't require as much energy and can work without things like fire to control woodies. Look to coppicing species as being the perpetual backbone of your forestry system. A lot of people, so coppicing is a feature of a lot of trees and shrubs, woody plants. When you cut them, they will grow back and they will continue to, just like perennial. They're basically woody perennial grasses. A perennial grass is a coppicing non-woody species. So you cut it, it grows back. You've got to, just like with grasses, you can't overgraze, as it were, the woody plants that you coppice. You've got to let them replace, you've got to let them photosynthesize and with that put the energy stores back into the root system so that the next time that they're cut, they've got the energy to recover. But coppicing systems are a great thing from an energy perspective because they can produce so much biomass, and you can use that biomass, as we all know, for so many different purposes. And then we can also use it for them for timber, for lumber and all sorts of things. But it's a perpetual thing. We don't know how long a coppice species will last for. I mean, we know that there's olives that are going for 2,000 years plus. They've been cut back. The the trees in the gardens of Gethsemane are still the ones that apparently Jesus walked through 2,000 plus years ago. So, we know that we can keep these things alive for a lot longer than we could if we just let them grow of their own volition. And valuating wherever possible is important. So I better move along. We're nearly at the hour. Buildings, number 6, the arrays of structures we build on our holdings are critical to the success of agriculture. William McDonough, I met William in Mallorca years ago and listened to him talk, and he said that if humans think they're so smart, why did it take them 5,000 years to put wheels on luggage? I've extended that to say, well, if we're so smart, why did it take us even longer, 10,000 years, to put wheels on our agricultural buildings so that we could actually mimic, because this is the thing that agriculture's not done a great job of. It's not done a great job of mimicry, and it's really set landscapes off, or biomimicry, I should say. So, this is some of the work that people like, going right back to Andre, or the shepherds of the world, who did it not necessarily with planning, but did it based on observation. And then Andre Besson, who came up with rotational or rational grazing, and then coming through to people like Alan Savory, who come up with the planned grazing program. And then you've got people like George Henderson, who was running chickens behind cows, and then Joel Salatin and the Salatin family and others, where we're trying to actually have animals which are migratory within their various territories. Well, that's where they've come from. We've domesticated them, or they've domesticated us, and what we've made them is relatively sedentary. And our program in our space is to try and move these sedentary systems into being mini migratory systems. So we do that through planning so that we don't overgraze and so on. And having mobile structures and mobile infrastructure and portable infrastructure and plug and play. Treat your piping systems like a set of USBs that you just go and plug into. There's all of that sort of stuff that we can do now because of the technologies that we have and the tools that we have. Having buildings which are energy efficient, and where, again, elements are supportive of that. That's really important. That's a bit of a no-brainer, but still people to this day build energy inefficient houses and put up with the energy bills and the discomfort that goes with it, and so on. So realise that buildings are degenerative infrastructure. So buildings, this is really one of the layers where we get the first set of really high degeneration. As soon as you build a building, it's starting to degrade. And so there's that to consider, that there's a replacement, financial replacement there, or a resource replacement. Put buildings on wheels and make them multifunctional. Build buildings within a whole layout, so see how they fit. Build for now, but place for tomorrow. So consider how your system might grow. Yield is something that happens, and you've got to be prepared for that. As it's a function of ecology and the dynamics of a trophic pyramid, that as you build more plant life, as you build more soil microorganisms, and as you build more plant life, then you'll build more animals, and everything needs more and more water, and your buildings need to get bigger and whatnot. So be cognizant of that. Retrofit to increase function, amenity, and energy efficiency. So if you've got existing buildings, then think about how I can play with them and how I can use them and make them more efficient. Fencing. Subdivide your landscapes by following lines of more. So, now and a lot of my work, especially on grazing properties at the outset, is looking at the climate and geography layers. And that gives me the shape of the land and the shape of the client, as it were. And then look at the water. So where are we going to put water systems, and where are we going to put fencing? So in a lot of cases, I don't have too much to do straight up on dealing with trees or or anything else, a bit of economy work, etc. But water and wire are my main development layers at the outset, because they're the things that get people going. They get the landscape going. If you can control animals in your landscape, then you can start to control the amount of ground cover that you have and start to change the energy flows that you have through a system. How much sunlight, how much photosynthesis are you engaging and promoting by virtue as an output of your management? Because it costs to get photosynthesis happening if you're going to go and plant things. So what do we use that we've got already? What management tools can we use in order to switch things around such that when it rains, plants actually find a different set of germinating conditions and off they go? Because we all know that plants are amazing things, and the default position of this planet is life. So give a bit of life, and a lot of life will come behind that, and build up from there. Build your economy, and then start to give yourself the capacity to come in and put in all of these other accoutrements to the system. So fence according to topography, fence using electricity wherever possible, and fence knowing it's 2016, not 1000 BC. A lot of people out there who still fence like it's 1000 BC, and I get that too. Sometimes it's the resources that you've got, but most people who are on this call are probably going to have access to electric fencing and wire and basic resources to get themselves going. You don't have to go and fence the whole system out. You can just fence a block or 2 blocks at a time and allocate the system, play leapfrog. So as you're in the next system, take down the last one and put it in front of the one you're in at the moment. People do that to get themselves by while they're getting their economy rearranged and the regeneration process started on their landscape. Soil. Make soil formation the top. I missed an icon now. I don't know what happened. Makes topsoil formation the #1 outcome of human habitation. That's all I have for soil. I could go in and rattle on all day about, how do we improve soils and all of the rest of it. There's so many different ways. I find, again, that, grassland systems are all over the planet, and they have evolved to be incredibly opportunistic. And so engaging with grasses as a starting point, especially given their ability to change soils so quickly because of their incredible root density and their relative availability and portability as a seed and opportunism, as I mentioned, you can get a system going pretty quickly by partnering early with grasses and then working up from there and building an economy around that grass. Whether that grass is or whether those non-woody plants are ones that give you a crop, or whether they're ones that you use grazing animals on. But I find that using non-woody plants as a starting point is a really good starting point because of it's where you are. A lot of people, if you're starting out, you're an annual. And so you're tied to that. You haven't got to, I look at landscapes that as they get more perennial, we get more perennial. And a lot of people are, we are a perennial species. We're not an annual species, but sometimes you've got to behave a little bit to start with like an annual and play that game so that you can get yourself going, cognizant of the bigger picture and where you're going, right? Don't get stuck on the annual treadmill because you'll be like a bloody drug addict. You're always back for your next fix. But if you're actually doing it as a means to an end, then it's a great way to go. So I'll leave it with that. Economy. It's never been easy to analyse and access markets. It's never been easy to start up. You can start up a Shopify website to sell your wares very quickly. So that's great. 20 minutes and you've got an online shop for $20 a month or whatever. So you can do that sort of thing really easily. Our difficulty remains in the terms of trade. Terms of trade is in agriculture is where you're looking at the farm gate price and the retail price. And there's an incredible disparity between the two, and an increasing disparity. So in 1940 in the US, in 1970 in the US, the farm gate price was 40% of the retail price across the board of farm products. It's now 9 cents in the dollar. So, you've got this, and costs have increased, and, numbers of people doing agriculture have decreased. So, people direct market as a way of overcoming that, and, there's those sorts of things that people do. Compliance is difficult, though, for a lot of people, because the system and the regulations are set up for an industrial food supply and value chain, not for a localized value on-farm or community-based value-adding value chain. It's not set up for that. And so the regulations are not there. And so we've got a sort of almost a clash of civilizations. And so I have some people, a lot of my clients are living in what I call a parallel economy. So embrace localization as the primary economy as much as you can. Produce what you like to eat. That's important. Don't be a pork farmer if you don't like eating pork. Although, because it's kind of like they used to say, if you're a drug dealer, don't consume the drugs that you're selling, because you're not going to be a very economic, successful drug dealer. Well, it's a bit different with this. We actually do want to. We do want to be able to taste what we're eating, so that we can be guided about improvements that we need to make to the palatability of what we produce. But also, there's often times where you've actually got a lot of it because you don't sell it all. There's always bits left over that don't potentially get sold. So, there's that sort of stuff as well. Understand the difference between a growth and a non-growth model. Some people just go on, they just got they haven't even had this conversation. So they just go ahead with growth. And as a result, they get all the pain of growth. Growth is like yield. Sometimes systems over-yield for the capacity of people to deal with those yields, and that might sound crazy, but it's true. You then have all of these gluts of production. Sometimes you get into a rut where you've grown to a point where you don't see your family anymore because you're having to deal with all of that growth. So socially, and that's where we find it most often happens. If you look at ecologically, it might be okay. Financially, it might be okay, but socially sucks. Who am I? What is that? Are you related to me? Oh, you're my child, right? I used to know you, as a function of dealing with the growth that you've got. So a lot of people in this space look to capacity, what their capacity is. How well can my designed economy achieve my holistic context? How can I get them the meeting of the ways there? How can I live within my means, and how can my means support me there? And designing for that. As my wife Lisa says, only support enterprises that have the health of the planet, its people, and all of its species as their main priority as well. And so that's a consumer thing. So when you're buying stuff, which all of us do, then consider that as being a guiding priority. And manage your economy like a perennial species, because you are. Now, I said before in the last layer that, sometimes you've got to play annual with annuals, but that's on a program, right? So you're starting from here. You might have to play annual and be a bit annual and behave like an annual, but you're doing that as a means to an end, and because you've got a bigger play to be, and that's to stay, and that's to make this place better. All right, I've got, what am I at? I'm at an hour. So this usually goes for an hour and a half. I've got some quick case studies to just go through, which I'll just go through. Did you guys want to chime in, Neil, or on this, Raleigh?
Yeah, we're good. We might, let's see, we're trying, there's another webinar that shares our software at 3:55, but yeah, let's do some case studies.
Yeah.
Maybe let's move on.
Yes, like 10 minutes. Go to some Q&A.
Cool.
All right. Yes. So Southampton Homestead, a few of you people would know. Most of these people have got some sort of presence online, so you can go and have a look at them. They got 120 acres. They got completely burnt out in a bushfire in February 2013. So, and when I say completely burnt out, all fences, all infrastructure, house, sheds, pipes underground, fences, vegetation, and animals. So they got completely wiped out and had to start from zero. They rose out of those ashes to establish, ran across the whole property where they could and established perennials, a perennial pasture base, and shifted into doing a polyface style model of management, which they've done very successfully. They have on-site processing of their chickens, so they spent $30,000 putting that in, and they've got a pretty good economy out of that as a result, and they won Farmer of the Year, effectively, award, the Australian government winner of innovation in sustainable farm practices. So that was one last year. So just 3 short years after a pretty horrendous event. So they've done a great job. Some of the big things that we're struggling with here, I know that Jeff and Michelle won't mind me talking about it because they run a pretty open enterprise and they're moving towards being a farm non-profit trust, is that trying to manage the cash flow of a site is always interesting, and managing the data that you need to generate to support that cash flow and the cash flow projections. So we've had a few recent challenges, and so on that front, we were going along pretty well at $30,000 a month of revenues at about 30% profitability, and then chickens stopped growing. Just stopped growing, and the feed bills kept coming, but the chickens, they had no chickens to market because they weren't getting to weight. So we had to do some fairly radical interventions to get their enterprise back and running. But these are the things that you have to do. And they're running along quite nicely again as a result of that. This whole space, you've got to realise that agriculture, I'm not going to paint any of these pictures of any of these people. They have got their life all absolutely beautiful, hunky-dory, sitting in their hammocks. It's not like that. There's hard work involved. There's a lot of innovation that one needs to go through early. It's like an environment. You've got to go through this hard sort of grindy, find out your way. It's like when you're a child and you're learning how to walk. How many times do you fall over with the innovation that is walking? And then ultimately you stand up and then you fall down and then you can't run. It's this whole thing is very much like that, and it takes a few years for things to go on. These people we've been working with since 2010, Farmer of the Year in 2012 for their state. They run pigs. Issues with them. Biggest issue is time and managing the value chain. It's a lot easier to be a pig producer that just produces pigs and then sells them to someone else. But guess what? The economy sucks in doing that. Just yesterday I saw in the Weekly Times, which is our farming newspaper, a headline saying pigs across Victoria are going to start to have to destroy their pigs because pig prices are so low. These people don't have a problem. Their biggest problem is supplying to market demand. And, so economically that's fine. Socially that's difficult. So it's always that balance of life thing. I've got 2 young kids. So, great. I think that these guys have got the best pastured pig operation in the world, and I've seen a lot of them. They move their pigs really well. So ecologically, big tick. Financially, motoring along nicely. Socially, that's the piece that we're always working on in terms of having enough time for the other things in life, like children. But we're getting there, and they're doing a great job. I'm really proud of them. This is an interesting one. This is a case of a no-growth model where we've got just producing 150 birds a month and trying to get that absolutely nailed financially. And that's working quite nicely because Bruce charges an appropriate price for his chicken. I wrote an article recently, or wrote an article a few years ago called Extensivizing Intensive, which you can read on our regrarians.org website, and another which was about this, about how do we manage omnivores in a landscape. And I followed that up with another article a few weeks ago called how do we produce chickens like cows, which also talks about the issue of the omnivore and how we can do things a lot more ecologically and with less input. Because, you know, this guy's has got a land base of about 80 acres and imports 60 to 90 tonnes of feed a year to produce these chickens. Feed is 70 or so % of his input costs. So if feed prices change, then he has to change. He's at an elite end of the market by selling chickens at red meat prices, which is, again, another thing that people don't think. People go, oh, $25 a kilogram, which is, what, $12 a pound? People go, wow, you pay that for chicken? And yet they'll go and pay that for beef. Right? I don't quite get the disconnect there, but that's where it's at. So we've got to explain a bit to our audience. But, yeah, we're doing a really good job here in we're planting. There's already a lot of planted acacias planted, and a lot of oaks and whatnot, and they're giving we already can see that that's giving a lot to the birds in supplement. So now we're going to do the whole property as of spring this year. I just finished the design. And we're growing cereals on the property and on adjoining properties, which we will harvest. We're sowing mixed species cereals. We're starting with wheat, peas and faba beans. We've bought a second-hand header, which will head, and so off the farm itself we'll produce our own cereal. And then the birds will go and be in those fields to pick up whatever's left. Savannah Farm, I might move on from those guys, because those guys recently stopped farming. They came to a point where it became apparently too much. So, you know, these guys have got every award under the sun. They're really lovely people, but they just got to a point where their growth model became too much. So just be aware of that. You know, sometimes when you motor along, it may become, there's going to be something ecological, financial or social that triggers a change in you that you're going to have to react to. So these people have done, and they've not sold the farm. They basically had a clearing sale, sold everything, and they're just having a hiatus for a while to sort of sort things out. But yeah, that sometimes happens, and that's okay, because the most important thing is to be happy and to be alive. Nomad Farms, Tom Bradman and his wife Verity, they have a property down in South Australia. And again, following some of the principles of the polyphos model of mixed species, one part following the other. They do broilers, sheep and cattle. Pretty basic operation. Tom and Verity are really good on not spending money, and they produce an elite product. And they've done a really good job on their branding. And branding is another big part of this, you know, the Nomad brand, getting it so that there's that brand recognition even at the restaurant on the menu. So there's all of that sort of stuff, which is great. This is one in Maui that we work with. It's going to be an agro-residential development. It's starting off as an agricultural development. So the first thing we did was we got the water and wire sorted. So we reticulate, because it had two paddocks, a top paddock and a bottom paddock. So we're now doing a mixed species grazing, and then following that with chickens. And while we're doing all of the land improvement stuff, we're doing all of the planning work, because it's to build a 53 lot agri-hood, or whatever you might call it, residential development on an agricultural landscape on Maui is quite a planning task. We've got years, I think we're into year 3 of probably a 5-year program of going through with the county to get all of the approvals done. So, but while we're doing that, we've got a series of enterprises and a brand that's being built that will then ultimately support the people who come to live on this site, which is part affordable housing and part rich people. Yandoit Farm, some of you will associate, there's a couple of corporates who became, they love festivals. So Michael, who's sitting on the rock there, and his wife Lisa. Lisa's a nurse, and Michael's an ex-corporate project manager. Bought a rural property, 140 acres, and it's sort of like their hippie outlet, and they go to festivals a lot, and they have a lot of kids come along and young people who come along who they then train in rural craft, and it's great while developing and managing a really lovely property down there. And they're not necessarily doing that to make money. They're doing it as an expression of happiness, because this is what turns them on. So, again, it doesn't all have to be about, you growing the best chicken or doing that. It's about making you happy and how you can do that whilst keeping you on the property, keeping your economy going and whatnot. Oops. These guys are another classic. These guys scrimped and saved to buy this 140 acres in a very dry part of central New South Wales. Again, we put in the water resources with gravity, using some of the savings and grant funding they were able to get. We did that very cleverly. They were fiscally very disciplined, and as a result, they were able to get their operation up and going and become full-time farmers within 2 years as a result of, and they just focused on one species. A lot of people focus on too many species straight up. Focus on one thing, go through the innovation that's always there on that, and before you give yourself the license to go on to the next thing. And so I'll stop with energy. And energy, extend photosynthesis for the longest period possible, make the shift to regenerative energy systems that sequester more carbon than they exhaust. And there's some of those that are out there. Troy Martz is a really great person in that space. Be strategic, pragmatic, and incremental, as I said at the start, and be hopeful. You've got to have hope, and you just got to, and just keep planning and replanning, and keep being hopeful, because that's the energy you need to bring to this. And so, with that, I'll pass it over to questions. I'm happy to go for as long as people want me to.
Yeah, good job, Darren. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
No worries.
Wish I could be a Rex. All right, guys, so we've got about 30-ish minutes left. This is tough because we've got about 120 of you on here. I know you've all got a bunch of amazing questions, but we'll try to, Darren, you reckon you could kind of do a minigun approach to some of this?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the questions I will have been asked before, but, we can maybe gang them together, because that's often. How do people ask questions? By typing them in?
Oh, yeah. You can see there's a little question box below.
Down in the chat. Yeah, I'll open that up so it's a bit bigger for me. I'll get rid of that. Thank you all. Okay. And I'm going to give you an insight. There we are. So am I on screen now?
Yeah.
There you go.
You're all on screen.
I just need to explain to people just one little thing. I've just moved into what was my 15-year-old son's office, bedroom, and he and his mates like a bit of graffiti. And so you can see a bit of the graffiti in the background. I've covered it up with a bit of it because there's some profanity involved and some creative images. So I've got an old mattress and a coat and a bit of this, that, and the other, right? So just bear with me there until the roller comes out. So fire away. What do we got?
Okay, so let's start with, let's see, the first one I saw was from Brianne. She had 2 questions. I was specifically interested in holistic hog farming. Questions of scale. How much land do you apply these processes to? And second question.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, one of the first things with any omnivore is planning. A lot of jurisdictions have a thing where you get classified as an intensive agriculture, and that's typically defined by where you have more than 50% of the nutritional requirements of that animal, of that herd or flock of animals, get supplied outside of the property. You could, and the reason for that is because if you have more than 50% coming in, then that means that you've got the potential for pollution. So that's one thing. So carrying capacity is an important thing. You can overcome that to an extent by using by bringing a lot of carbon in to sort of, as Joel Salatin calls it, a carbonaceous diaper to absorb the effluent, the manures and urines. But in terms of how much do you need for your market, that's really for you to define what your market is. Like Bruce and Roz down at Milking Yard Farm, I mean, they're selling 150 chickens a month. Now, that's not a lot of chicken when you compare that to a lot of other people who might be doing 20,000 birds a year or 30,000 birds a year. That's another restriction. So find out that market. Do you become that salami? Are you the salami person? Do you just turn all of your animal into salami? Or do you do, what's her name? Stack Farm in Wisconsin. Dan and Tina Solberg, they have got 17 acres. They produce little guinea hogs, which then Dan cooks. So he's got a mobile catering unit, a mobile smoker cooker thing, and he goes and caters at parties. And so he can put one of those little guinea hogs in there, cook it up, and even off his small land base, he can produce an income along with a few other incomes that people have to be able to keep their farm dream alive. So so be creative on that. Look at your land base. What can I support in numbers without getting in trouble and without getting my land into trouble? And then what do I actually need financially? They're the sorts of things that one would look at.
Nice. As a follow-up question, she asked, who would you recommend to look at in British Columbia or Canada in terms of holistic hog farming?
That's a really great question. I don't know. I might have to put that question out there, I think. I've only been to British Columbia a couple of times. I don't know the people up that way. Yeah, and there is a really good Facebook group that Jordan Green started, and Jordan is Sherry Salatin's brother-in-law in Virginia. Sherry's Daniel Salatin, Joel Salatin's daughter-in-law, called Pastured Pigs. So if you go on that Facebook group, that'd probably be the best place that I could think of where you probably go get an answer there. I think it's called Pastured Pigs. If it's not, go on Facebook and ask the question on Regrarians or and I'll, on our Facebook page, and I'll send you the link.
Awesome. So, question from Ruan. Question from Marius. So, Marius asks, what about plant agriculture? What about convincing nearby farmers to not use pesticides? Is that
yeah. The key people in that is this person in the US, in Canada, or North America?
I would definitely assume so, because I know we definitely have the biggest problem. Yeah,
the person of greatest interest in that space or people, one is Gabe Brown in Nebraska. There's probably no better exponent of cover cropping and organic cover cropping. So have a look at the work that Gabe's doing. Gabe's just been out to Australia, so he did a tour with Colin Seiss, who invented pasture cropping. So I'd say he would have gleaned. I know they gleaned a lot off each other. So how much of he takes of what Colin's done home? I know Colin's taken some of his stuff in over here. So, but yeah, have a look at what he's doing, but also look at what the Rodale Institute are doing in Pennsylvania. They've developed their roller crimper technology, and go on from there. But they're the two best exponents that I can think of. There's another person. I don't have my notebook in front of me. If they, again, write me a question on our Regrarians Facebook page, and I'll follow that up when I've got my notebook in front of me, because there's another name, but I just don't have it in my head, who is apparently the best exponent of cover cropping economic cover cropping in the US, who I only just heard about. You hear about these people
maybe later.
Constellation. They're these crazy, great people working out in the middle of the cropping wilderness, and which surrounded by people who are with big spray rigs and all working alone, and they're just getting by. And then someone goes, "Oh, did you hear about that guy or that girl?" Anyway, all right. What's next?
All right, good question from Curtis. He says, "Do you have a quick?" He's an awesome farmer from
Manitoba.
Manitoba, yeah. Okay, so yeah, Curtis asked, "Do you have a quick outline of defining scale? For example, we have 800 acres. We live 4 hours from our market. How do you locate your labor, equipment? How many products? Are they human-oriented or animal-oriented?" And he said,
what are you producing at the moment, Curtis?
Yeah, Curtis, type down below so you can maybe define some of that more.
I'm going to jump in because Curtis asked this question with Kevin Muno a few weeks ago.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
It's an issue of they're reworking a lot of their farm operations, and they're trying to figure out how they make projections based on current realities, right? So they were doing market gardening, but found that driving 4 hours a couple times a week wasn't really worth it to them. And
no, that's not going to work. That's where you start to look at doing stuff of concentrated value. I did a job in Argentina years ago, which was 7 hours and to get to anywhere, and that involved horses. And so the products that we looked at were jerky and shiitake mushrooms, dried shiitake mushrooms. So getting stuff out that had a really high value and that was easy to carry. Because when you're carrying water's heavy stuff. And so sometimes you just need to hear that once, you know what I mean? Because so often what we're doing is carrying water around. That's why it's efficient for people to produce cereals in these broadacre areas, and then put that on a truck. It's actually a relatively efficient use of energy to transport cereals from areas to areas, so to areas of market, because there's no water. Cereal is dry, so you're not carrying water, and there's very little airspace in between. Like, so when you're transporting a livestock from one place to another, so if you're 4 hours from your processing centre, you could have lost 10% of body weight depending on the temperature, and you get paid at carcass weight. So with that, you've got a big loss, and then you've got a loss on condition and quality of that animal by the time it gets there. So I think it's really important to look at what are the products that we can produce, and then what can we do that will send out the biggest value? Because it's hard being a commodity it's hard being in a commodity production area and getting into local marketing. There's got to be something that you might just start with that 5% of and start that, test the market. So, but it's got to be high value from what I can see and understand. Or it's got to be value added at your end to take the water out and to increase its value so it gets to the other end in a high value. If that makes sense.
Darren, we've got a lot of questions on keyline versus swales. I don't want to get into that right now because I'm going to do a separate webinar entirely just devoted to that issue. If you'd like to do it, I'd be happy to have you on again.
Yeah, well, I probably can speak to that as well as anybody, so
agreed. Yeah, let's set a date for that because I get questions about this stuff all the time and emails sent to me.
Yeah, so do I.
For all of you folks wondering about earthworks and keyline versus swales and physical methods of getting water into your soil, just hang on, and we will do a separate webinar on that, devoted exclusively to that issue, because I think it's a really big issue that a lot of people have.
Yeah, I see there's a question. Question from Patrick Lynch about Mark Shepherd-Lazy's keyline cultivation pattern at 1% fall. That's not a keyline cultivation pattern, and I've spoken quite strongly about that. PA Yeomans applied no fall to his keyline, so what Mark is doing he might call keyline, but it's not keyline, and there's a few people who do that. Keyline is a lot simpler a program when it comes to keyline pattern cultivation than what some people complicate, and Mark is one of those people. I admire a lot of what Mark does, but his keyline work is, well, it's not keyline.
Keyline inspired.
Yeah, that's whatever. I think it's more. I think it's more soil conservation inspired, to be quite honest, because when you study the history of all of this, as I do, and as I have, when you look at, PA Yeomans started off doing soil conservation as per the science developed and the methods developed by the US Army Corps of Engineers. So he did that up until the mid-40s, late 40s, and then he started to go, nah, this is not working for me, and started to look at how he could, and ultimately the keyline system came out of that. So, you've got to look at the way where ideas come from in some ways to come back and see where people have then brought them to, which is something that endlessly fascinates me as a student of the history of all of this. You can't see my bookshelf, but there's not many new books on it.
Here's a good question from Katie Duncan. She says, who is Rex 10 best suited to? Only landowners, managers, or could someone early in planning for future enterprises find it useful?
We classify the Rex, well, it's just called the Rex, not the Rex 10. We classify the Rex as a professional development experience, and so if you are in the profession of production landscape management, agricultural management, then going through the Rex it's a very different, like a lot of people here would have probably done or have considered doing a permaculture design course. It's a very different experience to that, because I look at the permaculture design course as being an introduction, a broad and long introduction to the theories and practices of permaculture. A Rex is a very different thing, in which we have a property that we together as a collective, including myself, will then work together to design layer by layer. So day one we deal with climate, day two we deal with geography, and so on, and we do designs on those layers as we go through. Now, if you're an engineer who's working in agricultural ecosystems, then that will be useful to you, because you can then start to, apply the Regrarians Platform to the thinking of your engineering practice, which you may not have before. You may just have looked at geography and water as layers. You might have considered, trees can fit into my engineering practice, and so on. You can look at the climate bit, the economy bit, all of those things would. So, I don't think that it's a course for everyone. It's not like the PDC, which I think is, effectively being marketed as a course, and to some extent is a course that anybody can do, and everyone can do. This one is more focused on people who are working actively in production land management. And so it has a somewhat limited market as a result, but it's a professional development experience for people who are working in that space, or who are supporting people who are working in that space.
Cool. So here's a question from Scott. So people systems are the hardest. Do you know of any examples of deliberate agrarian communities that are working?
Not bloody many. I'm sorry to say. Was that Scott, did you say?
Yeah, Scott Romack.
Yeah, Scott. Not many. those that look, probably the best that I know of, and I often talk about this place, is Ford Hall Farm in the UK. Arthur Hollands, whose book, the late Arthur Hollands, whose book, The Farmer, the Plough and the Devil, it's a beautiful book. He was kind of a Joel Salatin of the 40s and 50s and up until and 60s, 70s, up until his death, and sold everything directly. But he was a tenant farmer, so he rented, and his father was a tenant farmer from the same lord in the UK. And when Arthur died, the Lord decided to sell the property to become a golf course or whatever, but they already had 5,000 or 6,000 customers, and the customers got together and bought the farm, and it's now the farm with the most owners in the UK. And I call it, when I heard about it, I said, oh, well, this is the reverse of feudalism, because, you know, in feudalism, it's where every ownership is all concentrated into the hands of few with control of labour. This is where you've got the consumers actually own the farm, and where the difference is to this, to say being like a CSA model, is that it operates on those principles in a way where you've got a subscriber base, but they're owners, and in this case, there's hereditary rights to the Hollands family to continue their line, their bloodline on the farm, as long as they practice farming under a set of guidelines. And so, because that's another big thing in this, it's the, you know, when I read a lot about Indigenous land management, and it pains me when I read the stories of those people having their access lost to that land. And not just that, it pains me to know that all of the knowledge that they've gained, I mean, here in Australia, you know, some of the latest stuff that's coming out, we may have had people here for 100,000+ years. Even if it was 20 or 40,000 years, it's generation of knowledge about the climate, geography, etc., about the terrain, the terroir, that's been lost now. And so we come here as colonials and are sort of going, okay, well, you know, we're having to bloody reinvent stuff. What we need, and this is why one of the reasons why I came up with the term regrarians, is that we need regenerative agrarians. Agrarianism as a pathway has not been sustainable. That's why there's less people living in the country than there were 50 years ago, and there will continue to be. So the biggest and biggest land use on the planet, and I would say the most important land use on the planet, because it gives the food that people in the city need to eat, is being done by a declining number of people who are not being followed up by people who have got their knowledge from their lives. And so systems such as this are really important. So it's a long answer to your question. Other sites, there's just very few. And I think that's because it's often people who've come together more for social reasons as opposed to economic reasons. Or should I put that in another way? They've come together not for truly holistic reasons. So, yeah, there's very few examples that I can give there, I'm afraid. Smaller scope. Occidental Arts and Ecology in California, I think, is that they've done a really good job of defining themselves, and their kids like to be there. That's always a good sign. I've come into a lot of communities where the kids can't wait to get out of there, which says a lot. Yeah, but yeah, I'm sorry, there's just not very many.
All right, so here's a question from Robert Hayes. He says, thanks so much for the presentation today. One of our members has inherited a 250-acre farm in Uganda. There's a new house, lots of wildlife, beautiful cattle with huge horns. Question is there a public source of a LiDAR-type isometric map layer to help with planning? We're investigating balloon mapping and MapNet software.
Where are they?
This is for Uganda.
Oh, Uganda.
Yeah.
or you're going to be struggling with LiDAR there. Can I just answer another question that came up? The name of that farm, Derek Hancock, is Ford Hall Farm. So again, if you want the link, just go to the Regrarians Facebook group, Facebook site page. Sorry, and I'll put it on there. Yeah, Ford Hall. It's one word, not two words. Yeah. LiDAR mapping in Uganda. Look, sometimes it surprises you what's been done. I would be surprised. I've not been to Uganda, so I don't know the state of play there, but it would surprise me that they've done LiDAR there because it's a fairly expensive technology. I would suggest that people look at alternative methods of doing surveys. We've developed a couple of methods, one of which I've published on our website called Making Contours on the Cheap. And you can use a handheld GPS and a laser level or an A-frame or something like that and Google Earth to create contour maps. The maps that people make out of Google Earth are crap, same as the ones they make out of Google Maps. They're just not reliable, so I wouldn't do it that way. So that's one of the best ways that I could think of doing it, short of getting more expensive survey equipment. You can buy a handheld GPS for $100, $200. If there's 3 or 4G networks available, even using your phone can be okay, but just realise that the point accuracy of the phone is not that great, so prefer you to use a GPS. But yeah, making contours on the cheap. Just go to regrarians.org and put that in, or there's if you get a copy of the geography chapter of the Regrarians Handbook, there's a full description. I've got actually that whole chapter has got a lot on surveying and different surveying equipment, from all the way from the A-frame up to the RTK drone or UAV and everything in between. Total stations, the other lights, blah blah. What else have we got?
We've actually got to cut it off.
Yeah, there's a lot of great questions. Yeah, and stuff. We're bumping right against Wayne Dorbin's other webinar. We're going to get our whole new software next week, but man, this is awesome. Like, we do have 4 more minutes, so let's talk about, Darren, you had some awesome things you want to talk about in terms of Rex or a potential offer to some of these folks.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we wanted to put forward to people was to sign up. So go to regrarians.org and be a subscriber, or just go to the Regrarians page and let us know that you're interested in doing some more work with us. We're going to be doing some online training. I mean, everyone's doing it nowadays. It's something that we've had in the works for a few years now. We've got a RON program that we're developing, which is really professional development training for around the Rex. And we've got about 300 or so different topics that we have within the 10 layers of the Regrarians platform that we're looking to bring. And so we'd like to offer people who've come today a 10% discount to be involved with that. But they'll just need to give us their name to get that going. So get that. I'll put that up on our Facebook group today. Facebook page. Too many bloody Facebooks. That was the main thing I wanted to say. And otherwise, our main, if you want to find out more about our work, then the Regrarians page, which is on the screen now, is one place, and our homepage, which is just regrarians.org, that's another place that you can get all the information and interact with us. But the Facebook page is where we ask people to come in and ask questions, so that if I'm going to be answering questions without getting paid to answer questions, well, I like to do that in the public foray, in a public forum, and that's a good space to do that. So that's where we're at.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe
so keep an eye out for our new E-Rex. and the new Rex online. We'll be doing a whole Rex online, so that'll be happening this year and next year.
Awesome. Thank you, Darren. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you both. My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Lovely.
One of you guys has also won a copy of Polyface, which is we'll be announcing that.
Polyfaces, yes.
Yeah, that's an amazing film. I love that. That was a really inspiring film to see it. Permaculture Voices. So we'll be sending out a free replay to everybody, available till Monday. And yeah, if you want to see other webinars like this, sign up on our email list at sustainabledesignmasterclass.com. We have a catalog of all our previous webinars available, but you better hurry because we're going to increase the prices pretty soon. But we've got 25, 26. Oof. Yeah, we got a big catalog going on. It's pretty cool. But sign up there at sustainabledesignmasterclass.com.
So what? It's not going to be $4 anymore?
Yeah, the subscription is going to go up because we're going to put things into packages that'll make it easier to kind of look at, like dry lands and farm packages.
Good idea. Great.
Thank you, Darren. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. If you do want to do the Keyline versus Swales webinar, let's set a date for that, and we'll set it up.
Yeah. No worries. Next week, same time.
Actually, Byron was supposed to do next week. Byron told us to be our guy next week, and he's just dropped out on us. So that is an option.
Oh well, let's do that. I could fill in for Byron.
There's also an option to name a bison after Byron Joel.
I'm not as handsome, or I'm not as good a crooner as Byron, of course.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll do.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Same time next week.